Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth George, Chief Membership Officer with the American Guild of Organists. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to a webinar that, is going to answer a lot of questions for you using the new Employing Musicians Handbook, your compensation package, that's being presented by the Committee on Career Development and Support. Before I introduce our moderator, I just have a couple of housekeeping notes. You are muted, but we do want to hear from you. So please post your questions in the Q&A icon that you'll see right at the bottom of your screen. And actually, as each presenter finishes, there may be some ones that they can easily answer that they may reply to in that box. But we will, at the end of everyone's presentation, obviously open this up for questions. This is also going to be recorded and will be up on our website probably within the next 48 hours. An email will go out to all of our members with a link to where it can be accessed. So I think I've covered everything. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our AGO counselor for membership, Vicki Schaefer.
Good evening, everyone, and I hope you're all doing well. Those of you in the Northeast, we're sending warm thoughts your way so the snow will melt soon. So this resource, I need to thank the committee, the previous committee who put this all together. This handbook has actually been available since October of 2020. And there's a lot of information in here. This is a very valuable resource for many of us, whether you're just starting out as a church musician, or if you are one of those people like myself who never really thought about how to negotiate a contract. I think sometimes we're just happy to get a job. So there's lots of information here. And if you haven't already tried to find this on the website, it's on the AGO website under careers. And if you scroll down to the career development and support part, you can then find the handbook. It's a gorgeous handbook with lots of valuable information. It looks like this, if you can see it. So I'm not going to say anything else other than we are so glad that you're here. Please, as Elizabeth said, please do ask questions. We are here to help. And of course, we're always here to help in whatever way you need us for any kinds of questions or concerns you may have. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to the AGO Executive Assistant, Eric Burke, who will take care of a lot of information. So Eric, take it away.
Thank you, Vicki. I don't know about most of you, but one of the things we miss most since the FTC settlement order is that salary guide where we could look up a number. And unfortunately, as most of us have begun to think about it, sometimes that number was not really that advantageous. So I'm going to do a short presentation entitled Finding Your Number Without Breaking Antitrust Laws. One of the things that is really difficult for us to know is that your number really is unique as far as what you might expect for the work you do. Your number is not anyone else's because it's based on your educational level or professional achievements. It's based on your experience in the field, your particular skills or competencies, and your ability to meet professional requirements of the position. No chart is ever going to take into account all that should go into that number that you're being paid to do a job for a religious institution. Most of us try to get jobs that we would enjoy doing the work for, and I think if we get a really good position, if we were independently wealthy, we probably might think about doing it for free, but that's very rare that a musician would be independently wealthy. So we need to be our own best advocate for what that number should be when we're negotiating a salary package. There's two really important checklists you need to consider when you're putting this together and thinking about what goes into that number that might be in a chart. Your temporal needs that are supported by your earnings, cost of living, basic benefits, the retirement savings you should be making, health and other emergency savings, and continuing education. And whether you're a W-2 employee or a 1099 self-employed person working for a religious institution, you're going to have instruments and music scores to do the job. You're going to have to do planning and research and buy those resources to do it. You're going to have to use office supplies and equipment, and you're going to have to pay for substitutes or arrange them. And so most jobs provide those things if you're an employee, but in some cases, you might be an employee and they're expecting this. And so this is something you have to say in your discussion about compensation, that these are expensive to put together. Then there's the issue of the time requirements it takes. And we're going to hear a very detailed exploration of the time requirements worksheet that's one of the appendixes in the Employee Musician's Handbook. But your time will be taken up with services and rehearsals, and the actual time and preparation both have to be considered for both of those things. Your personal practice and study, planning and communication with clergy and other staff, administration like maintaining a music library, filing the materials that you're using on Sundays and Saturdays, and then preparation for special services that happen, several times a year. Recruiting other musicians, whether they're volunteers or paid. And if you have paid musicians, you're going to have to be doing their payroll and turning that in and taking attendance and thinking of all the different things that must be done for those responsibilities the church has. You have to help with that. And if you have volunteers, you're probably going to have to spend a lot of time rewarding them and thanking them and giving them opportunities to share their talents. Then we need to find some numbers that we can actually use in considering what your salary could be. And without a chart and without having something as a recommendation that the AGO used to make, we're sort of left with two types: the actual or historical figures that people have been paid for your work, and then the aspirational or inspirational situations that you would like to have. And so there's a few things here we've put on this bullet list. The first one, the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics actually records from tax returns what people have made doing the work we do. It's a little bit difficult to find, but if you go to U.S. Department of Labor by doing a simple internet search and then click in a search for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, these are figured and collected by region. And you can find someone in your area, anonymized, of course. These are not actual people that you would know who has earned what, but you can search by career names. You could put in music director, choral director, organist, all sorts of different job titles, and find out what people were paid for a full-time salary in your area. These are actual historical figures, and they are available both in terms of the mean or average, and then also the highs and lows for both part and full-time. Then there's also the posted salaries offered for jobs that you'll find on job posting boards. The AGO has one, but so do lots of other places. You can look up Simply Hired or Glassdoor or any of those websites that post jobs. And the more specific you can get about what the job type is, the more successful you'll be in finding comparative salaries. Then some church denominations have guides, especially I'm thinking of like the association or diocesan level of a church that would be making recommendations to their member parishes that would say, this is what you should pay your church staff. Then there's also some ministry resource providers that collect this in terms of through a survey or a poll as to what churches are actually paying their employees. Then there's a couple of aspirational guides you can look up. There's something called the Salary Happiness Index. And this can be worded many different ways, but there have been studies that take a city and say, what does it cost to live a comfortable life in this particular city, given the cost of living, given the housing that's there, given the job opportunities? And you can search for this by location. And then there's the professional musician scales that are available in places like the American Federation of Musicians, which is a union. So remember, the AGO is not a union, and we can't recommend figures, but you can look up what someone you do would be getting in a similar job as a musician if they were under a union contract. Now, I've prepared some frequently asked questions to list that would probably speak a lot to this union problem. We can't be a union. And that's our second question, but let me handle the first one at the beginning of this. Why can't the AGO publish salary, wages, and conditions? Well, in 2017, the AGO entered into a settlement agreement with the Federal Trade Commission which prevents our organization from issuing any kind of recommended compensation level for musicians. A very clear explanation of this was published in the AGO Executive Directors column in the American Organist in February 2017. James Thomas Schauer has done several articles on this topic, and he has given us lots of information about why this happened and what we can do to get around it. The second one, organists need a union. Why can't the AGO become a union? Well, the first part of the answer to this is it would change our status as a nonprofit organization. This question was answered in the above referenced column in February 2017. Unions are not permitted to accept tax-deductible charitable gifts from members, foundations, or government agencies like the NEA. This is a major source of income for the AGO and many chapters. Moreover, unions establish fee schedules for labor by negotiating with management. Our members work for thousands of different employers, and there's no central management representing all of the employers, i.e., there's no management representative with authority over the clergy with whom we could negotiate. So it would be impossible, and without naming it, this answer refers to the ministerial exception, whereby the courts have largely decided in a case known as Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church and School versus the EEOC from 2012 and Our Lady of Guadalupe School versus Maurice Beru in 2020, that religious organizations have autonomy in deciding who is a minister. Therefore, persons who relay the faith being espoused by the organization through their work, such as providing religious music for public worship, can be considered ministers and are not able to sue their employers for breach of contract, over discrimination, or other reasons that the employees would normally be able to sue their employers in non-religious work situations. So we're sort of left to fend for ourselves, to advocate for what we need in a job, and the salary level can't be solved by having a union because we aren't really a class of worker. We're not all doing the same exact task. We're doing similar tasks across many individual organizations, and we're often the only person there. But every different faith tradition is going to describe our work in their own way and may or may not consider us a minister. The third question, researching data for my own desired salary seems like too much work to get paid fairly. Is there an easier way? Well, who's the person that's best qualified to represent your skills, experience, and education and general professional capabilities? You are. Remember, you're going to be compared to other candidates in a search process. What other musicians can or could do in the position will always be in the minds of those for whom you work. No table can be one size fits all for a compensation recommendation. You and only you can know the following about yourself: the time it will take you to do the work, and you're about to hear about how to figure that out. The cost of living for you in the area where you have to live in order to do the job. Your preparation for the job, education, certifications, continuing education, and job or life experience that prepare you to be effective in the position. The value you bring to a religious institution based on what you offer, musically, administratively, and spiritually, and who you are as a person with regard to ethics, values, and character. The costs to you in order to do the work expected, which will need to be outweighed by compensation, which makes it worthwhile for you to do the job. And then lastly, what can chapters do to encourage employers to pay fair salaries to organists and choral directors? This is referring to the fact that we used to have a grievance procedure where chapters could get involved with helping a member that had a difficulty with their employers. And we can no longer do that. We don't have the grievance procedures, and it was really difficult for the AGO to play policeman to settle a disagreement, mainly because of the ministerial exception that I mentioned earlier. But there are three things we can do. We can educate our members about the contents and availability of this Employing Musicians Handbook. We can provide links to places to look for regionally related sources of comparable salary information, such as the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics. These are not actual salary figures, but sources to look up what historical averages have been earned in specific employment situations. And then third, we can encourage both chapter members and employers to do the necessary calculations to arrive at what both believe to be fair compensation. So hopefully you've got some ideas from this about how you can go find your number. And I encourage you to do the research, to add up what all of your time is, add up what you would expect to be paid, and actually challenge the employer as to whether they would do the job you're expecting them to do for the amount that they're offering you. Researching your own needs, assessing the value you bring, and leveraging the documentation you have to support your salary expectations will give you a much better set of results. And there's a picture of the Employing Musicians Handbook cover. And if you would like to have a copy in paper form, please give us a call at AGO headquarters and we'd be glad to send you one. And we can also send you one for your employer or anybody else that you want to share this with. And so now I'm going to turn this over to Anthony Rispo, who has prepared a really great demonstration of the time requirements worksheet and what it takes to get all those figures ready to advocate for yourself.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So I'm going to take you through the part of the handbook entitled Appendix A, Considerations for Calculating the Weekly Hours of an Organist and/or Music Director at a Religious Institution. And there are so many really great points laid out here. And seeing as our job market is so diverse, I think once you go through these points, you'll see so many different aspects of jobs that you may have had or jobs that you're considering. And it's just filled with so much information. But what we're going to do tonight is parse this out, break it down a little bit, make it a little more digestible. And I'm going to have this dialogue with you as if from the purview of somebody getting ready for an interview, or perhaps you're getting ready for an annual review. So I've prepared also a slideshow for you, and I'll take you through it right now. Okay, so in elucidating your responsibilities to make it much clearer for you as to what you're going to be doing in your potential position, we have outlined 10 considerations. So time spent in worship services, rehearsals with other musicians, organ practice, selection of music, preparation for several special services, maintenance of music library, administration, meetings, educational opportunities, and other. So I worked up this little pyramid not to make a statement that one, it requires more attention than the other, but this is just a visual for all of us just to kind of see, preparation is something that is by and large done behind the scenes, right? So it's a huge foundation for the rest of our work. And communication is something that is a little more visible, right? We have interpersonal interactions with members of the congregation, the clergy, the staff, etc. And then outcome, I kind of like to think of this as every once a week or every weekend or special services. But again, this is not really a quantitative demonstration. It's just we spent so much time building a foundation, and we want to justify this foundation via our compensation. So let's see how we can do that. So your job is an aggregate of responsibilities. So you're going to, like I said, parse them out and understand how much time is required for each responsibility. So another visual, say you work 25 hours, and I have to make it very clear that this is not a recommendation by the AGO. This is just an example. You can look at your job description or a job description that you're interested in, and you can decide for yourself, how is this going to look for me if I create some kind of hierarchy? So there's sort of a mental contract you're doing, and you're doing this to protect your time. So time spent in worship service, this is the first point in the document. So each service is a rendering of many hours of study, preparation, and life experience. So the salary figure is essentially an agreement between you and the employer that, you get a position that is higher ranked salary that would generally mean that they trust your skills. They trust that you are qualified. and they're working within a certain budget. And if you get a position at the higher end of that budget, that's what that could mean. It's a symbolic gesture of the qualifications, essentially. And including the time spent in worship services is necessary to document, even though that time spent in worship service is pretty consistent and you know exactly you're going to be there every Sunday, the same amount of time, etc. It's just you want to factor that into the raw numbers. So obviously this varies. Those raw numbers, it depends on the denomination. I mean, some institutions, we can think of Catholic churches, you're playing up to 5 services, 5 masses a weekend, right? In some other places, less than that. And so you could be spending anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 hours just in service time. So you want to make sure that you write that down, notwithstanding the fact that that's pretty obvious, right? You just want to have that down for yourself. And so one of the biggest parts of our job, this is point number 2, as you can see, rehearsals with other musicians. And a lot of this document kind of bleeds into one another. A lot of it kind of works together. So there's a lot of overlap. So you're preparing yourself to prepare others efficiently. One of the things that we want to do, I would suggest is, this is from the perspective of, let's say you're going into an interview. It might be helpful to inquire about the choral music tradition at the church or the institution, the synagogue, or wherever you're going to be working. Get a feel for what they're used to. You want to ask about the status of the choir. Are they paid, semi-professional, volunteer? Ask about the vision of the choral music program specifically, and then other aspects of the music program. And then you ask yourself internally, like, how long does it take for me to prepare all this stuff? This is important. It's important to engage with the committee who might be hiring you. Not only does it show that you are pro-social and you're willing to engage in this kind of a initial dialogue, but it shows that you're really interested in going to that place and working with them and building something. And these factors will help you determine how much time you need to spend. So you're going in to try to understand, how much time am I going to spend on these things? What do they already have built? And how much can I promise myself? How much time can I promise myself to do these things? Organ practice. This is a self-assessment, essentially. How long does it take for you to practice? You want to take some measurements of that. You want to measure your time. And consider aspects of the position. Outside your personal practice time, maybe you can consider drafting a mock music list with preludes and postludes and accompaniments. Maybe you've done this before. Maybe this is a fresh start for you and you're just getting this kind of position for the first time in your life. You could do this as a practice, see how long it would take you to get through this list of music in terms of practicing it. And so the rest follows suit. As you can see these points, estimate how much time on average you might need. You can time your sessions for a week and calculate daily, or you can do this for a month. And essentially, it might be safe to say that 2 hours on average per day, 14 hours a week, that depends on your time. Selection of music. So similar self-inventory on time management, essentially. What's your planning strategy? So when being interviewed, or even for an annual review, maybe there's a few snags here and there and you want to fix your, how organized you are. If you want to be more organized, maybe new things are being introduced into the church system. You want to consider, how can I bind my time with others and how can we work together effectively? Maybe we need planning meetings. How much time is this going to take? How can we make this effective and so that we're all on the same page? So you might want to know your library inside and out and read through old bulletins, understand your church year thoroughly. All these things really help to mitigate any obstacles or potential obstacles. Obviously, we're going to come across obstacles in our respective positions and in life in general, but this is a really good way to narrow down certain specifics to help you measure how much time you're spending on these things. And for organists, what are your specific responsibilities? Directors, how will you delegate these responsibilities? So this has to be a very tight conversation. And one of the things that we can do is to share, what I like to do is share Google Documents with people that I'm working on projects with, and we can just in real time make decisions on the spot or do some edits. This is very helpful, a really good organizational strategy. So number 5, preparation for special services. So this is an interesting one because special services could mean anything outside the scope of your agreement, or special services could also mean feast days. And this could be negotiated in several ways. If you were to be called back for an interview, let's say, and you're interested in pursuing this position. Is this a salaried position, or is this a position for which you'll be independently contracted? Because that's very important. And we'll get to that at the end, and you'll see why. So if you're salaried, special services, like I'd mentioned, will fall likely into the work highlighted in your agreement in proportion to the other requirements. If you're independently contracted, there might be actually, you might have some room for some for more negotiation. So back to this point, maintenance of music library, number 6. Again, it's important to ask the committee during an interview as many questions as you can about these logistics. Not only does it show that you're proactive and pro-social and you really want to know the turf so that you can work with it effectively, but the truth is there's a whole bunch of other things that go along with a music library: licensing for performance, for music, and to be mindful of the fact that a library isn't just a physical place, especially with COVID and with new measures that have been taken to coordinate organizations and the functionality of them. We are hybrid for most of our work, and yes, we're going into school now, into church, we're singing, we're doing things like normal as before, but lots of these things are going to remain. Lots of the things we adopted during COVID are going to remain. And to have a backup of your library at home, or if let's say we have another wave, which I'm sure we will, then you have it in your computer and you can work from home as if you were on the campus. Administration. This is probably the most arduous part, but it is fundamental and it's very important. It keeps our connections with our coworkers very just tight when we are on our own sort of schedule and we are working effectively and we know what we need and we know the kind of help we need and we know how to communicate well with one another. This is a very consequential one. Number 7, administration. So some of the nitty-gritty things, though, aside from the interpersonal stuff, is maintain and publicize the schedule of music selections for services and events. And I'm going down this list as if it's written in the book, actually. So plan and coordinate rehearsals in light of any competing workspace in the institution. That can be a problem, and often we have to find alternatives. If one group has a rehearsal, there's a meeting here, a meeting there, we're going to need to make sure that we have our plan in order and submitted to the respective person in charge of said spaces. Track budgetary spending. Audition and recruit volunteers and professionals. And it's not always the easiest thing, right? I mean, takes some persistence and time. So all of these things are going to need to be taken into consideration for how much time you spend. And it could vary, like I said, you know, if you have a professional choir or you're going into a position with a professional choir, then recruitment might not be, you know, as much of a chore. But in a lot of cases, we're going to have to spend time engaging and getting people involved in our program so we can build it. And that does take time and persistence. Staff meetings, committee meetings, congregational or other meetings. So you're going to want to find out how many of these meetings fall on the same day, especially if you're working part-time, half-time. You might not be able to make it for several meetings in person, depending on your other jobs or other responsibilities. You might want to work something out, see if you can be there on one day or 2 days, something you're going to want to iron out at the beginning of the process, just for clarity's sake. Advocate for meeting agenda and time limit. This is very important. We know that meetings can go over, and we know that meetings can often feel aimless. So if we advocate for setting a standard of, okay, what are we going to talk about today? What are we going to get through? Are we going to have any action items? And let's keep it to this amount of hours, you know, put a time cap on it, right? So this is an interesting thing. This data comes from 2021, and I'm sure some of it has changed a little bit. But as you can see, in terms of figuring out how much time you're going to spend at your job, it's important to factor in, obviously, commute time. And we can see the data shows us that a lot of Americans really enjoy the hybrid approach. Whether this changes or not, we're not so sure. I mean, we cannot predict, but the trend looks pretty moderate in favor of this in terms of working from home and in person. So there could be maybe some dialogue about how much time you spend on campus, at the church versus home. And a little bit more data for you too. You could see here, we cross these over here, working from home exclusively, prefer exclusive on site. We see it's not that high a number. You see the further down we go, prefer exclusively remote, it gets pretty high up there. People really started to like this idea of working from home. Educational opportunities. So again, this is another self-evaluation. How much time do you require? Educating yourself on the music you're learning, or you've learned writing an article, practice public speaking. You know yourself well. So practicing this, writing an article and timing it maybe. And then, you know, if you have to do it once a week, twice a month, something like that, monitor that. See how much time you're putting into these things. Because again, often we have in this profession, lots of us have part-time jobs, half-time. There's full-time for sure, but people are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. We want to monitor how much we put into these things. You know yourself best. And so we're coming to the end of this presentation, and slide number 5 talked about other responsibilities. So we look at events here, and then branching off to your salary, and then branching off to feast days and concert series within the scope of your agreement, let's say. And then other outside the scope of the contract. So if you have agreed to build a concert series with such and such amount of performers and whatnot, and obviously the feast days, that's considered within the scope, let's say. Anything outside the scope can be negotiated. Depending on whether the job is part-time, half-time, full-time, you might want to consider the following. Have there been any major celebrations or special events to date? What kind of preparation did they entail? These are questions you can ask a committee or somebody on personnel committee or the pastor or the former, if it's ethical and everything is on good terms, then if you're getting help from somebody who knows the place well, and hey, this is how much time we spent on this, you make sure that it's people that are going to be hiring you that you're going to ask these questions to, people who are on the committee. Get a feel for what they're used to beyond the scope of the job description. What foreseeable events are on the horizon? This is an interesting one. Is the church on a rotating schedule with other churches in the area to host ecumenical service, sometimes during Lent or Advent, I guess. I've often seen it happen during Lent, where churches in a village or a community will team up and they'll do an ecumenical service, and the responsibility for music might fall on you, and that's an extra how much time, right? You might be able to delegate and share responsibilities with other musicians in your community, though. Still, organizing that falls on you sometimes in these cases. You want to ask for tangible examples for catchphrases like, we wish to expand our vibrant congregation's spiritual engagement with the community. Platitudes like that are wonderful sales pitches, but it's very important that when we hear things like this, we ask, okay, well, what does that mean for you? What does that entail? How can I be of service to that? And there's sketch a few things down and propose to them. Is this what this means? How can we make this look like what you're wanting? Extra work arrangements. So we're going on a little bit with this approach of negotiating. So we're going to look really quickly at a macro approach and a micro approach. So the macro approach would be discuss the scope of the extra work, meetings, prep time, resources. Consider a few proposals proportionate to your salary. Keep in mind what the institution can afford. Factor in travel expenses. You might have more flexibility for this if you pick this approach. With a micro approach, we're going to calculate what you make an hour. Determine the time required each week and for how many weeks. Factor in expenses. This is more straightforward, less leniency. So this would be considered for special services outside the scope of your agreement. And then next is a little chart. Again, this is not a recommendation here. It's just a quick chart. I'm not going to say much about this. You can see for yourself that this is a breakdown of what you can expect for extra project if you so wish to negotiate with your position. So let's say the project, let's say it's a jubilee or an anniversary of some kind for somebody, or a big event, who knows what it could be, anything. Say it takes 2 months. You're going to break it down based on your salary. It's essentially what this chart is saying. So just to break it down even more, and it's about 840 extra, hypothetically, a month, plus travel. And for this, you need a 1099 because it is outside the scope of a salaried contract. So you might be able to make an argument for your personal fees relative to other work you've done in similar parameters. Of course, you want to stay within a sensible range, congruent with the religious institution's budget. Start with a negotiation that's a little bit on the higher end. You can always come down. And draft a cost benefit. So extra work is extra time. And if you can't meet your budgetary obligations, you might have to refuse the work because we all have to live and we all have to do our thing, right? So this is you being your biggest advocate. So thank you for your time. That was just touching the surface, really, but that's all we have time for. and happy to take questions if there are any. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Doris.
Good evening. Employee benefits can be a very significant component of an overall compensation package. The benefits that an employer must provide are very few and far between. Namely, 6.2% of wages must be contributed by an employer to the Social Security Trust Fund. Employers must provide workers' compensation to cover medical expenses and disability benefits if you are injured on the job. Under the Affordable Care Act, only employers with more than 50 employees are required to provide health insurance, although health insurance or some sort of health coverage is mandatory for all Americans. A small employer, in the parlance of the Affordable Care Act, that means an employer having fewer than 50 employees, can voluntarily provide a health plan that is compliant with the Affordable Care Act. Or an employer may have a bona fide established health reimbursement account plan to reimburse an employee for some specified expenses that are specified in the plan. If a small employer doesn't provide a compliant health plan, it's up to the employee to maintain the employee's own plan, or perhaps you can be a dependent of a spouse, or if you're under 26 years of age, you may be able to remain on a plan maintained by parents. If you as an individual get your own plan through the health exchanges, you may be able to qualify for a tax credit if your household income fits within the range of 100 to 400% of the federal poverty limit. And currently, the limit is $12,280 per year for an individual. So 400% of the 100% of the federal poverty line amounts to $51,520 per year. And the federal poverty line is adjusted according to the number of members of the household. So the poverty line for a 4-person household is $26,500, and of course 400% is just the 4 times that amount. So seriously consider the option of using the exchange for your own health coverage in the event that your employer does not provide it. Sick leave is not generally required. It's not required as a matter of federal law, but there may be state or local laws that require some allowance for sick leave. Just as an example, in the city of Philadelphia, where I live and practice law, a local ordinance requires all employers to give sick leave and that is accrued at the rate of 1 hour for every 40 hours worked. But small employers having fewer than 10 employees do not need to pay for sick leave, but you cannot be penalized essentially for taking sick leave. Ask about the method of accruing vacation. must you use it or use it? Right, I guess I reverse that. Use it or lose it in any specified year or other period of time? Or can you bank vacation that you accrue? If you leave the job with some accrued vacation in the bank, can you get some payment in lieu of vacation? There's no established law that mandates one or another program for vacation. It is really up to the individual employer's plan. Disability or life insurance is a possible optional benefit, something to ask about. It doesn't need to be provided unless there's some particular state or local requirement to do so. But the provision of insurance to cover for disability may be a valuable benefit, and who pays the premiums is an important question. Church employees are not generally eligible for unemployment compensation. And we saw how this played out when so many musicians were put out of their jobs because of COVID. Happily, because of the establishment of the pandemic unemployment assistance program, independent contractors, gig workers, and church employees could qualify for pandemic relief. But in the absence of some particular law that addresses a disaster like COVID, don't count on eligibility for unemployment compensation. Some states do allow churches to voluntarily participate. So in the event that you are out of a job through no fault of your own, it may be worth checking with your local state. I want to talk a bit about retirement plans, which may be very low on the list of concerns for a person applying for a job, but retirement plans can be a very effective way to build a nest egg. You cannot take the full retirement benefit in a tax qualified plan until you're at least 59 and a half. You generally have to take a required minimum distribution at age 72 and a half under the current law. But some tax qualified plans do allow for early distributions in the event of disability or hardship. Some plans may allow individual participants to take a loan against the plan. The availability of loans or early hardship distributions is a matter of the individual plan document. Even though an individual church probably does not have a sophisticated defined benefit plan or even a 401k plan or a 403b plan, and these refer to sections of the tax code that provide for tax qualifications of the plan. There may be a diocese or a convention of churches in which you could participate by virtue of being an employee of an individual institution. But this is an important question to ask when you're weighing the pros and cons and the total compensation package of a particular job offer. The advantage of a tax qualified plan is that you are not taxed on the portion of the income that is that is allocated to the plan in the year in which you earn it. And income tax is deferred until you actually take the distribution. And for most people, your tax bracket is lower at the time of retirement. But the benefits or the value of a benefit may depend on your overall household financial picture. If the employer or convention of churches or diocese does not have an established retirement plan to offer, certainly consider opening an individual IRA, individual retirement account, where you still can take advantage of some tax benefits in the years in which you earn income. Churches do not need to participate in the Employee Retirement Income and Security Act, and may be excluded from some of the protections of that law that gives employees a right to sue, a right to have disclosures, broad disclosures of plan documents, but still under the Internal Revenue Code, you're entitled to at least have a summary of offered retirement plans and have access to review the complete retirement plan upon your request. Be sure to confirm your status as an employee rather than an independent contractor. And misclassification of bona fide employees as contractors is a very common problem. Independent contractors don't have any right to participate in group retirement tax qualified plans sponsored by employers. And independent contractors are responsible for paying their own contributions to the Social Security Trust Fund. So I mentioned earlier that an employer must contribute 6.2% of wages. Well, there's also a matching 6.2% by the employee. But if you are truly self-employed and providing services to a church as an independent contractor, you're responsible to pay 12.4% of wages to the Social Security Trust Fund, because you have to pay both the employer and the employee component. The overarching concept of a independent contractor is that the independent self-employed business owner can control the manner and method of performing work. So important questions to ask. Am I free to show up for this particular service or not? Or can I pick and choose which services I play for? Do I have full control over the program, or do I have to listen to what someone on the clergy or a church governing board tells me to do? Who provides the equipment? Who sets the time when I need to do any of my work? Who provides the music that I play? Who provides other support services? the distinction between an employee and independent contractor can be a very important one and of great interest to the Internal Revenue Service, and may open the door to access to a number of other benefits and protections. And with that, we can turn it over to questions.
My apologies. Okay. We do have one question. How do you handle applying for jobs at churches that are different religion than that of the organist? It's an interesting question. Anthony, Eric, Vicki, anybody want to chime in?
I'll attempt this one. I have worked for just about everything from Unitarian to Roman Catholic churches as a substitute, and I've been an employee of a Presbyterian, a Methodist, an Episcopalian, a Congregational, and Baptist church in my career as an organist. And I have to say that the very first word that comes to mind is carefully, because not every church is willing to hire someone of a different belief. Many are, and you may find a very positive experience if you're not of the same faith of the congregation you're serving. But sometimes there's a requirement that someone be able to be a member of the parish that they're serving. Sometimes a church specifically wants something that in the world of synagogues they would call a Sabbath goy, meaning you find very few Jewish organists playing for synagogues because that's work on the Sabbath. So they often hire outside specifically on purpose because that's a real technical job that they would rather not do themselves if they're, practicing the faith. And so you have to be very clear about what you can contribute and what you cannot contribute. And you have to ask the potential employer to be very clear about what they expect of you in both how you relay their faith, even though you don't have it, if there's something that you don't agree with. I can give a specific example from my background. I'm actually Baptist, but I play for churches that don't have the same opinions about that subject. But that doesn't mean that I let that get in the way of doing what's needed for me to do the job. If it did, then I wouldn't accept that job. So you just have to be very clear with yourself, and you have to be very clear with them about what you are doing. And I feel that my responsibility is to do everything in my capabilities to support their faith in what they expect of their music. So that may sound like a non-answer, but that's the best I can give. And I think if you make sure that respect is a really high priority for both you and for the employer, you will probably have a positive experience.
Thank you, Eric. Anthony, I saw you nodding. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that some key points that Eric mentioned was knowing, where you stand and knowing where they stand, perhaps knowing their mission statement, and also because Doris, I think actually Eric also mentioned the ministerial exception. We're particularly vulnerable to this, and we don't have that kind of employer-employee protection relationship. So also knowing, Eric made this point eloquently just now, that we're going in for a job first and foremost, and it's for many of us spiritually fulfilling, but we're not going in to change a culture. So we're going in to do the best we can to facilitate as best we can for that. This is something that I struggled with when I was younger. I think a lot of younger people might actually, because it's a very idealist approach. I'm going to go in and just do all these things, but you learn quickly that it's truly a service, and you're being hired to enhance that experience for the members of the church.
Thank you.
I think the question is important to pose in the job interview and application process. There are some churches that specify that we want someone of this particular faith, or maybe more broadly, I've heard some churches require that you embrace Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, and that may not be in the theology of every individual's religion as such. I think you have to be open about it and try to ascertain at the outset whether the church has any specific expectations of the organist's own religious commitment.
Interesting. We just had a comment here. I'm the only person in the sanctuary who doesn't take communion. The rector, whenever we meet up, just on accident says good morning, but then turns away. I don't choose to discuss the topic of religious affiliation with him, so I just have to take it. That's probably the best thing to do. Well, we are at just a little bit after 8 o'clock. And Vicki, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to share?
No, I would just, again, thank everyone. And we will be discussing this further. There's some future webinars coming up, and we're also going to be in Seattle. Some of us will be in Seattle. And again, if you have questions or concerns, all of our emails are somewhere. You can get in touch with Eric at headquarters, and also Elizabeth, and my email is also on the website. So thank you to the committee members who spent a great deal of time putting all of this together and really kind of digging into what we hope you need to know. And I'm sure it'll bring up more questions as you move forward. So we are here to help. And thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Anthony. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you a little bit about Leadership 2022, because I'm assuming we do have some chapter officers that might be watching this webinar. We still have registration open. It begins this coming Sunday from 7 to 8:30 p.m. in the evening, Eastern Standard Time, and the same on Monday evening. And we've really designed this conference for chapter leaders by chapter leaders, meaning that there's going to be a lot of time for deep conversations about the future of what leadership looks like in this new normal. So I encourage you, if you are on the fence about whether to attend or not, take the plunge. Go to the education tab, and under that you'll find webinars and workshops, and you can register there. Thank you everyone again for your participation. Everyone stay well, be safe, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.